Hey there, how there, ho there, it's Jeff Cutter Diamond welcoming you to yet another Cutter Top 10 NFL video. And today we're going to look at the top 10 NFL Conference Championship moments of all time. As we are in Conference Championship week, we have my beloved New England Patriots, of course, wearing the Brady jersey, in Denver against the Bo Nixless Denver Broncos. He injured himself during overtime in that controversial game against Buffalo. I don't like Buffalo. Patriots, Bills are rivals, but Buffalo got hosed. I will say this much. Buffalo got hosed on a couple of plays and all that. But yeah, Bo Nix is hurt, so Jared Stidham, the guy that the Pats drafted from the University of Auburn to basically be the backup to Cam Newton, now he's the starting quarterback for Denver in this game. I'm not taking Denver lightly because I know for a fact that in 2024, was it? Yeah. A couple years ago, the Argos lost their starting quarterback, and I'm like, yes, Winnipeg's going to win the Grey Cup. Not so fast, Cutter. So anyway, yeah, it's New England versus Denver. The Pats, if there's one intangible Denver has over New England, is that the Pats are donut and 3 in Denver during the playoffs. I know that the Pats have been in Denver at home in the playoffs, including Tim Tebow coming to town, and we beat the crap out of him 45-7. But yeah, that's big. And the NFC title match has the LA Rams and the Seattle Seahawks. So NFC West rivals going toe to toe, and it'll be huge and all that. The Rams with Paka Nakua and Matthew Stafford against Seattle with the seemingly overrated Sam Darnold. San Francisco basically ruined themselves. And I would say Doug Baldwin, but obviously I'm wrong. But yeah, I think Seattle's got a chance. I think the Rams do have a good chance. A lot of people said the Rams are the best likely bet to win the Super Bowl of the non-number one seeds, and that's Denver and Seattle are the one seeds. Are we going to be set for a Super Bowl 2014 rematch in 2026? Maybe. For the Pats, if they win, they face the Rams in either a Super Bowl rematch of 2019 with the Rams or 2015 with the Seahawks. Time will tell. Personally, I'd rather have New England versus Seattle because Matthew Stafford's a good quarterback and he is a Super Bowl winner. But anyhow, let's get to this going with the conference championship games, the top 10. Now, for fairness, I put 5 AFC and 5 NFC matchups. Rank them 1 to 5 based off of that. And then I just pick, well, which one the better one is, AFC, NFC, and then make that there. Got it? Capiche? Here we go. Number 10 is the Tennessee Titans shocking the Jacksonville Jaguars in the AFC title game 1999-2000. So the Titans were 13-3. Usually that's a good spot to maybe win a trip to the divisional playoffs, but they had to play on the wild card. What do you say? Well, there's a reason why. Because the team above them in the AFC Central, back when there were 6 divisions instead of 8, were the Jacksonville Jaguars, 14-2, meaning that the Titans had to go to the wild card game and almost lose to the Buffalo Bills, but then they did that Music City Miracle bullshit. And yet, Buffalo, I sympathize with you. But anyway, the Jaguars were crushing it. They crushed the Miami Dolphins 62-7 in one of the biggest playoff blowouts in history, sending Dan Marino and Jimmy Johnson to retirement. And even Jay Fiedler looked pretty good with Mark Brunell. But yeah, the Jaguars looked good. Unfortunately, the Titans somehow went to Jacksonville and beat the shit out of them 33-14. It's like, what the fuck? Yep, it happened. It happened. So unfortunately, yeah, that was a big blow to the Jaguars. So the Titans would get to their first and only Super Bowl in franchise history, the Oilers/Titans, where they would be 1 yard short. But the fact of the matter is that the Jaguars have never been to a Super Bowl. That's been their closest trip to the Super Bowl. Well, they did get to the AFC title game 3 years prior against the Pats, but the Pats beat them. But anyway, it's weird. Jacksonville, including the playoffs, were 15-3 and never lost against a team not named the Tennessee Titans. That is just fucked up, but it is. I know you'll be saying, well, is there a New England Patriots one in there? There actually is one New England Patriots one. Only one. And shockingly, it's going to be in the negative. But more on that later. Number 9 is New Orleans versus Minnesota in 2010. So New Orleans were full of bad luck. They were one of the worst hard luck franchises around. It took till 1987 to get to the playoffs, much less all that. But yeah, like they were terrible. As bad as the Tampa Bay Buccaneers were being 0-26, the Saints were the first team they beat. And Tampa went to the NFC title game in 1980. They lost to the Rams, but still, they made it through. At least they made the playoffs 4 years after their birth, whereas the Saints had to wait till 1987 to make the playoffs, and then they lost to the Vikings. The Saints wouldn't win the playoff game until 2000, and that was against the defending Super Bowl champion Rams. Nevertheless, the Saints were in deep trouble because in 2005, Hurricane Katrina hit, and New Orleans almost lost the franchise to San Antonio. But fortunately, though, cooler heads prevailed. The Saints stayed in New Orleans, and they were decent. The Vikings were trying to get through to their 5th Super Bowl in history. They were 0-4 in Super Bowl history, not even making the Super Bowl past 1977. And yes, there will be another Vikings one. The obvious Vikings one will be there too. But the fact of the matter is that, the Vikings were having troubles. They made a massive move after Brett Favre spent that 1 year with the Jets, basically played through an injury and fucked the Jets over. They didn't even make the playoffs. All they needed to do was beat Miami, and the Jets would have won the division, and the Pats would have won the wild card. But no, Miami just had to beat the Jets. Chad Pennington getting revenge on the Jets, who dumped them off for Favre and basically screwed the Pats out of the playoffs. But Brett Favre found a new home with the rival Minnesota Vikings. Of all teams, why a freaking rival? Well, Packer fans really booed the shit out of him when he came to Green Bay for a regular season game. Unfortunately, though, the joke was on them. The Vikings won that game. Nevertheless, Brett Favre was doing magic, and the Vikings were getting close for a field goal attempt. But Brett Favre, instead of running the ball for 10 to 15 yards, and he had room to do so, and then just spike the ball and then go for the winning field goal, decided to throw the ball. It was picked by the Saints, and Paul Allen of the Vikings radio network went bonkers, and rightfully so. The Saints would kick the field goal in overtime, giving them their first Super Bowl appearance and a Super Bowl win against the Colts and Peyton Manning. Number 8 is the Seattle Seahawks comeback of 2015 against the Packers. You'll be probably thinking this is too low on this list, but there were better ones ahead. The NFC actually you had 3 very good ones and all that. But the fact of the matter was that the 2014 Seattle Green Bay one was big. Aaron Rodgers was trying to help the Packers get to the Super Bowl against either New England or I can't remember who their opponent were. But I know the Pats game was the second one. So yeah, the Seahawks were in deep trouble. They had a massive move as John Ryan, the punter and holder, actually made the miss like a fake field goal and threw for a touchdown. And then one of the Packers players inexplicably touched the onside kick recovery, meaning that the Seahawks could get the ball, and they did. Seattle would engineer it, win the game in overtime, and go to the Super Bowl for the second time. The defending champs were, of course, when Marshawn Lynch was not given the ball at the 1 yard line. And I'm a Pat fan, and I think that was bullshit. Speaking of comebacks, number 7 was the 2007 comeback, Colts versus Pats. Peyton Manning was a good quarterback. Let's not forget about that. But he just could not beat Tom Brady in the playoffs. Tom Terrific was working fondly, and we were headed for a match against the Chicago Bears. So anyhow, Tom Brady looked pretty good. They were up 21-3 at the half, and it looked like the Pats were going to go in Indianapolis and beat them and send the Colts into another choke job. The previous year, and I talked about this in my divisional top 10, was that when Vanderjack missed that field goal and ruined his career. The Colts somehow came back from 18 points down to win 38-34, winning the trip to the Super Bowl and beating the Bears in the Super Bowl and giving Peyton Manning a ring. Anyway, number 6 is the fumble from 1988, excuse me. And no, this will not be the last time I talk about the Cleveland Browns in the 1980s. Obviously, you'll know which one it is. But anyhow, the fumble was huge. Cleveland had just been defeated on home turf by the Denver Broncos in the game I will describe later on. But they were going to Denver this time for the AFC title game. So we knew the winner would take on those pesky Washington Redskins, who actually had to fight off a determined Minnesota Vikings team who had shocked the number one seed San Francisco 49ers in the divisional round and were a goal line stand away from a touchdown by Wade Wilson, but he overthrew his receiver, and the Vikings could have shocked Washington and gotten to the final, but they didn't. But anyway, it was 38-31. Ernest Biner had the ball, and I can't remember who was the guy who put the hit on him, but Biner fumbled the ball, and Tony Lilly of the Broncos recovered it. And Biner couldn't believe his luck. He fumbled the ball. Cleveland, if he had been hit, Cleveland would have had the tying touchdown and went to overtime. Yeah, Denver did concede a safety on the final play of the game, but it didn't matter. Denver won 38-33. But the joke was on Denver. Cleveland got their karmic revenge as Denver got their butts handed to them in that one quarter. They were up 10-0, and then they gave up 5 touchdowns in the second quarter. So anyway, Cleveland can laugh about it. All right. Number 5 is the other time I'm talking about the Vikings. 1999, Falcons-Vikings. This was huge. Minnesota was 15-1. They shocked a lot of people. They picked Randy Moss when Dallas said no, thank you. Randy Moss burned Dallas 3 catches, 3 touchdowns on Thanksgiving Day, which was one of the biggest Thanksgiving matchups of all time. The Vikings were 15-1. They lost to Tampa in week 6, if I remember correctly. But the Vikings were big because they had a good defense led by John Randall. They had Randy Moss at wide receiver. They had Robert Smith at running back, which wasn't that bad. But they had a resurgent quarterback by the name of Randall Cunningham. Eagles fans know who the heck he is. He was this versatile running quarterback who was fun to watch for Eagles games until he injured himself in week 1 in 1990. And basically, his career kind of fell flat. But he became a pocket passer and he helped the Vikings get to the NFC title game at home against the Atlanta Falcons. Now, one thing everyone forgets about the Gary Anderson game, and of course, this is the Gary Anderson game. One thing everyone forgets about this game is that the Falcons were no slouches. Everyone thought, oh, the Falcons were pretty much like a 10 or 11 win team, or even a 9-win team. No, incorrect. The Falcons actually shockingly went 14-2 and were under the radar. That's what people forget about this team. The Vikings had a chance to go up 30-20 on Gary Anderson's field goal, but he missed wide left. The worst part was it was makeable, and it's indoors. No weather problems were going to fuck him up. Unfortunately, for Anderson, he missed. Falcons tied it up on a Terrence Mathis touchdown with under a minute left, and then Morton Anderson kicked the winning field goal in overtime. The Falcons were going to the Super Bowl. They would take on the 14-win Denver Broncos in the Super Bowl, but get bit themselves. As Vikings fans were happy as the Falcons got their butts handed to them by the Broncos, and John Elway retired a winner. Now you're be thinking, well, 9 or 10 win teams. Well, there was an honorable mention in the Giants Packers from 2008 when the Giants when the Giants beat the Packers to go to Super Bowl 42 and beat the 16-0 New England Patriots. That game was big because Lawrence Tynes, and former CFLer Lawrence Tynes, I may ask, well, he was a CFLer before he went to the NFL. He missed 2 key field goals, and the Giants were in trouble. But Brett Favre, as macho Camacho as he was, threw a terrible playoff interception, and the Giants capitalized. Alrighty, number 4 is the Freezer Bowl between the Cincinnati Bengals and San Diego Chargers, 1982. The Bengals were a good team. Ken Anderson, was he the MVP that year? I can't remember, but I think he was. Yeah, Ken Anderson was a good quarterback and all that. Since he had a good offense too with James Brooks at running back. I can't remember who the running back was, but anyway, yeah. It wasn't Ickey Woods because that was way later. But anyway, the Bengals looked sharp at home and all that. They were going to play at Riverfront in one of the coldest games ever. It was minus 22 degrees Celsius wind chill. That's how bad it was. It's like, well, the wind chill was close to that today as I'm taping this. The day I'm taping this, it was minus 22 with the wind chill in Kitchener. But anyway, the frigid conditions were huge. What's even more crazy was that San Diego had to play in the Freezer Bowl because the previous weekend, and yes, I did cover this in my top 10 divisional round things, is that the Chargers had to play Miami in what they called the Epic in Miami, in which the Chargers were up 24 nothing and barely squeaked out an overtime win 41-38. The Chargers were going from a very hot and humid Miami to a very cold Cincinnati, Ohio in the space of 7 days. So can you imagine the temperature drop and all that for the Chargers? Dan Phelps was not himself. The passing attack of the Chargers were not themselves. The Bengals were intensely big. They won 27-7, getting to the Super Bowl, but then losing to those pesky San Francisco 49ers. And we will get to those 49ers in just a second. Number 3 is the Ice Bowl. I won't lie, the 2008 Giants Packers game was going to be in this list. But I found out through NFL Throwback that they did the top 10 conference championship plays and they had the Ice Bowl in it, 1967. So I'm like, well, fuck that. It's going to be on the list. And I put it at number 3. Now, it's not a traditional conference championship per se because back in 1967, it was still AFL and NFL instead of AFC and NFC. So practically it's two leagues going after each other. But this counts as a conference championship game because it was a Final Four, if you will. Because you got to remember, the AFL champ would face the NFL champion in Super Bowl II. Oakland did their job. Now the question was who was going to play in who was going to get out of the Ice Bowl. So the Ice Bowl had happened. The Packers beat the Cowboys at the Cotton Bowl the previous year. People forget that the Ice Bowl was not for Super Bowl I. It was for the spot in Super Bowl II. But anyway, yeah, on New Year's Eve, it was one of the coldest days ever in Green Bay history in Wisconsin. Though the temperature was just as bad as the Freezer Bowl. It was just amazing. Dallas somehow managed to do okay. Bob Hayes had to run with his hands in his pockets because it was so cold. The Packers players were told not to wear gloves because it makes them look wimpy. But thankfully, the African American players actually wore brown gloves because, obviously, how's Lombardi going to tell the difference? Nevertheless, the Ice Bowl happened. The Cowboys were actually winning, and then Bart Starr led a massive drive on fourth down with 20 plus seconds left. They decided to go for it at the 3-yard line, and Starr made a massive plunge into the end zone, beat the Cowboys, and then the Packers won Super Bowl II and gave Vince Lombardi a ride in the sunset before he went to Washington. Number 2 is what we call the drive. 1987 Broncos Browns. Remember when I was talking about it in the fumble about the Browns in the 80s? Well, this was the game. It was the drive. The drive was big because the Cleveland Browns were actually trying to be prominent and all that. They were prominent pre Super Bowl merger, but the fact of the matter was that Cleveland was starting to get better. 1980, remember the Cardiac Kids, and then they lost to the Raiders on Mike Davis' interception. But yeah, the Browns were getting back. Bernie Kosar was a big move for Cleveland at quarterback. They actually had to fight off the New York Jets in double overtime when Mark Mosley, former MVP kicker of Washington, actually missed a field goal. The Browns actually were down by 10 with 4 minutes left, but Mark Gastineau made a stupid roughing the passer play that helped the Browns out. The Broncos, led by John Elway, were doing their own thing and all that. It was a huge game. Cleveland was up 2013 on a Brian Brennan touchdown, and then they had the kickoff return. And unfortunately, Gene Lang botched the kickoff, and they had to go down the ball at the 1.5-yard line. They could have just let the ball roll in the end zone for a touchback, but they didn't. So Denver was in deep trouble. 98.5 yards, huh? But John Elway orchestrated that 5-minute drive, which led 12-play, 98-yard drive that led to a touchdown to Mark Jackson, tied the game, and then Rich Carlos with his very bare right foot, because he was a barefoot kicker in Cleveland in this time of year. Crazy. He kicked the ball. A lot of people actually said it went wide left, but it just snuck in the goalpost enough that the Broncos would win the game. They go to the Super Bowl, and again, Cleveland did have karma because the Giants would win the Super Bowl. And finally, number one is what they call the catch. Niners Cowboys 1982. The Dallas Cowboys were still dominant even though Roger Staubach had retired. Danny White was waiting in the wings and all that. He was trying to do his job. Tony Dorsett was still there. A few good defenders like Jeff Pugh was still there. Cowboys were decent. Tom Landry still was coach, and they were doing okay. The 49ers were coming back from the dead. People didn't want to go to the games in the 70s. They had Jim Plunkett for a few years, but he didn't do anything about it before the Raiders got him. And boy, howdy, he was a Super Bowl winning quarterback. Heck, they even swiped O.J. Simpson from Buffalo for a couple years. But yeah, the Niners had troubles. They had a third round quarterback by the name of Joe Montana from Notre Dame, who was good coming out of college, but people were not too keen on him. But in 1980, he led them to a massive comeback against the New Orleans Saints, and the rest was history. Montana looked pretty good. So it was Cowboys 49ers in Candlestick for the title, which was funny. It was the second game of the big doubleheader because the Bengals Chargers were earlier in the day on NBC. CBS had Niners Cowboys. A lot of people remember CBS having Summerall and Madden, right? Well, strange as it sound, it wasn't Summerall and Madden who did the NFC title game. It was actually the great Finn Scully alongside Hank Stram doing the game for CBS, which was like, what? You're not going to put your number one team of Summerall and Madden? Well, it was on purpose because Finn Scully was soon to be departing CBS for NBC. So they gave Scully the NFC title game as a present, as a going away present. But yeah, Summerall and Madden would do Super Bowl 16 because CBS had the rights to that. But yeah, it was huge. The Cowboys were piling it on. It was 21-20 for the Cowboys. And then Dwight Clark, out of freaking nowhere, with 57 seconds left, Montana floated the ball towards the back of the end zone. A small receiver would have probably not been able to make the catch. But Dwight Clark, at 6'3", made a massive play with his arms, managed to pluck the ball before it was going out of bounds. Touchdown Niners. And that was one of the biggest moments in San Francisco history. They were they were looking good. Now, there is another part to this. People forget that this was not the game. This may have been kind of what they called the game winning play, but it wasn't the end of the game. There was still time for Dallas. And Dallas made a run for it. And Danny White was making a mad dash into San Francisco territory trying to get the position for the winning field goal, but he fumbled. So Dallas still had a chance to score, and they almost did it, but they fumbled it. And the catch was still is still talked about in San Francisco, in Dallas, and everywhere. You know that a big conference championship game would happen because of Dwight Clark's big hands. Anyhow, I'm Jeff Diamond. I do.